This video is now in session, and Democrats are in a bad position speaking on the Senate for the 2024 election and the 2026 election. And the reason why is because it involves how the Senate map works and how Senate seats are rotated every single election. So every other year, there are 33 out of 100 senators up for re-election, or in one case, 34. So those groups of senators go up for re-election every 6 years, and thus that's why we see different maps every other year, and we only see the same map 6 years after it's been introduced. So the 2020 election that we had, those senators will not be up for re-election until 2026. This is the 2018 map, and this will be up for re-election in 2024. And that's a bad thing for Democrats. It is, because there are a lot of seats here that are have Democratic senators but have not been won by a Democratic presidential candidate in decades at this point. I mean, if we look here, West Virginia, Montana, these are states that have not been won by Democrats in a long time. Ohio, another example. And then we see other seats that aren't that competitive for Democrats that they can pick up. They might be able to pick up Texas and Florida, but beyond that, they're not really able to pick up any other seat, which makes this an incredibly unfavorable map for Democrats in 2024 because it's a presidential election year, and the best scenario that they can have with this map is it being in a blue wave midterm year like it was in 2018. But even in a 2018 blue wave year, it still isn't quite a good map because Democrats can't expand on where they can go. They flipped Nevada and Arizona, but they gave up North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, and as well as Florida. So now the only seats that they can really target are Florida and Texas, because Missouri, Indiana, North Dakota, none of these seats are going to go to Democrats in the future unless something fundamentally changes about the Democratic Party structure, which is not going to happen. So let's just assume for the 2022 map that let's just assume for the 2022 map that Democrats are able to flip 2 seats. Oh, you know what? Let's just say for the benefit of the doubt that Democrats are able to flip 4 seats, and they get 54 seats in total from the 2022 election, which they will need, by the way. So that means that Republicans would not have this amount. It would in fact be 54. So I'm going to edit that number to say 54. And then let's semi-combine this with the 2020 presidential election. So with that map, there are many seats that Democrats have that are at risk of being lost because it's a presidential election year. West Virginia is not going to vote Democratic for the presidential ticket, so it's harder for Joe Manchin to win this seat because there may be more people who might just buck him and choose the Republican opposition. The same thing goes for John Tester of Montana, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, and if Democrats lose all 3 of the Rust Belt states, that's even worse for them because that's 3 seats gone by them. And if they're not able to get Texas or Florida, that's worse for them. So let's just try to make a kind of reasonable map from this. So based on the 2024 map, I can see West Virginia flip in towards Republicans, and I see an opportunity for Joe Manchin to probably not run for re-election just because of how polarized and how Republican West Virginia has gotten. The other seat at risk is Ohio. Ohio is going to be a contentious one. Now, Sherrod Brown has demonstrated that he's able to win in very tough positions, and he's kind of like a dark horse candidate. That said, he might not be able to prevail in an election year where there is no blue wave. So, as a result, that seat would flip. And then if we keep going, then Montana is another area where Republicans could gain seats in. And another area, if Republicans are able to get Arizona, that's another seat. So that's 4 flips, and that already brings it back to 50-50. And that's just contingent on the idea of Democrats winning North Carolina. Ohio, and Wisconsin. Ohio is not going to be easy for Democrats to win. So in this kind of scenario, it's very bad for Democrats because they have to protect a lot of their own seats, which have not won, presidentially speaking, for several decades, and thus it wouldn't be a very good map for Democrats. It gets worse though in 2026, where in 2026, even though Republicans have more seats than Democrats, the Democrats don't have much pickup opportunities because it's a midterm year. I expect 2026 to be something like 2014 for Democrats, where they're not able to keep a majority in the Senate or in the House. So as a result, a lot of these seats would flip. I mean, even though they could go for Iowa, or they could go for Maine, North Carolina, Texas, Alaska, even though they can go for all of these states, Republicans can go for Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, and that would counteract the growth that Democrats have. So let's just put that into account. So Democrats are most likely going to be able to get Maine because Susan Collins is unlikely to run for another term, and thus I would place it at a lean characterization. North Carolina, they might be able to get that. And let's just say that they get Alaska. And with all of that, Republicans are able to counteract that by getting Michigan, by getting Arizona is actually technically not up for 2026. So but Georgia, they could get that seat as well from Jon Ossoff, who's up for re-election in 2026. They can get Colorado, well, not Colorado, but in the most extreme scenarios, they would be able to get Colorado, but they'd also be able to get Minnesota. So that would be a 50-50 split. But that's before taking into account the 2024 losses that Democrats are almost likely going to have. So that would put Republicans in the majority, which is a horrible prospect for Democrats and something that is unfortunate because of how their maps work. The 2018 map is not a favorable map for them at all. The 2026 map is a little bit more favorable, but at the same time, they have their own seats to defend. So, the most favorable map, in our opinion, is the 2022 map for Democrats, because there are not that many, there are more Republican seats than Democratic seats, and in terms of Democratic seats to defend, there are way less to defend. They just have to defend Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and as well as New Hampshire, in comparison to this map, where they have to defend Colorado, Arizona, Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, in comparison to the somewhat uncompetitive Senate seats that the Republicans have, which are only North Carolina, Maine, and Alaska. The rest of the seats, and as well as Texas, the rest of the seats not as competitive. For the 2026 map, the 2022 map, Democrats can go for Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Alaska in the future, Florida in the future. So that's 7 seats that in the long term that they'd be able to get. And that would make a much more favorable map for Democrats and a much less favorable map for Republicans. That said, 2020, they better win the Democrats have to win as many seats as possible in 2022, or else they're not going to do well in 2024 with such an unfavorable map for them, because they have the majority and a lot of their seats come from states where Democrats have not won in presidential elections. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.